all right, and okay. All right, let's start with our blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol hamim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Good morning. It's nice to see all of you, and welcome to the Parsha of Mishpatim. Mishpatim, which means ordinances. It sounds so dry and kind of boring after last week's Parsha of Yitro, which was the standing at Mount Sinai and the thunder, the lightning, the fire, the shofar blasting, all the Jewish people standing at the Mount Sinai saying, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will obey. So that's how we always remember it. But then there's something that's very interesting, which is Na'aseh v'nishma does not appear at all in last week's Parsha. It is in this week's Parsha. It is in the Parsha of Mishpatim. And so the Jewish people say Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will obey. They do that in this week's Parsha at the end, after we go through all the explanation of all of the ordinances, and that is when the Jewish people say this. So you probably have heard the very famous Midrash that says that God went to all the other nations and offered them the Torah. And what did they say? Does anybody remember what they said? You can unmute and say, so Misty's going like, no, we don't want it. So before they said that, okay, you're right, that was their second response. The first thing they said is, what's in it? What is in it? And so by saying what's in it, it says, then God, what God said then is that he stated and gave him as an example, a mitzvah that was going to be the hardest for them to do, as whatever the nation was. So nations that were kind of, their thing was, I don't know, murder and pillage. It was like, you can't murder, you can't rob. So whatever was the nation's thing, their weakness, that was the mitzvah that God told them was in the Torah. And then they did what Misty said, which was, no, thank you, we don't want it. And the answer of the Jewish people that were always, the commentary always zeroes in on, is what did the Jewish people say when God offered them the Torah? They said, not what's in it. They never asked what's in it. They said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do it and we will listen. Now, some people said that was the last time a Jewish person ever signed a contract without reading it through to see what all the stipulations were. I'm not sure how smart was that. But then the question is the relationship a contract or is it something else? So we have the metaphor that is more appropriate in some ways, not exclusively, but more appropriate in some ways, that our relationship with God is much more like a bride and groom standing at the chuppah. And that when the groom says to the bride, Harei at mikudeshet li, behold, you are consecrated unto me, and before the ketubah is read, that what is the response? It says that if either party were to say, wait, before we continue with this wedding, can you just tell me, I want to know, are you going to be taking the trash out? Are you emptying the garbage? Are you going to be cooking the meals? Like, what's in this for me? You know, what am I getting out of this? What do I have to do? If you're like, I don't think I really want to marry this person. If you're coming to the chuppah and you're asking that kind of a question, that's already saying that you're not interested in the relationship, or that you're looking at the relationship as a list of things to do. And like, what am I going to have to do? So it's interesting, in the days in the newspapers where people would put in, I guess they're like personals, like who I'm looking for. I'm looking for somebody who's dating. I'm looking for somebody who will do this, this, and this for me. It's like, that's not the person you want. That what you want is, I'm looking for a person who I can give to, who wants to be in a meaningful relationship, who wants to grow with me. That's what you want to say, not somebody who's going to do A, B, or C, like, what are you going to do for me? Or what am I going to have to do for you in like all of these specifics? That kind of arrangement is considered as like an anti-relationship forming start. So standing at Mount Sinai, the Jewish people this is a marriage. Anybody who is married or who has been married, when you stood under that chuppah, did you really have any idea what you were in store for the coming years after you got married? Nope. Nope. No, you didn't. So no matter how well you thought you knew this person before you got married, you had no idea really what was going to be happening in your life. Could you even stipulate what was in this relationship? It's not even anything you could describe. The question is, do you want the relationship? That's really the only question. So that when these other nations said, what's in it? What they were really saying is, we're not relating to this as a relationship. We're relating to this as a laundry list of things to do. So tell us what's in there. And so then God tells them the thing that would be the most difficult for them, in a way, just like if you were trying to get somebody not to buy the merchandise. It's like, if God really wanted to sell it to them, he would have had like a kiruv approach. It's beautiful, you'll have a good life, you'll have Shabbos, you'll have a meaningful whatever. He would have chosen that if he was trying to sell it to the other nations. But he wasn't trying to sell it to the other nations. He was trying to say, do you want the relationship? And the other nations were like, no, we really don't. Actually, we like to do whatever we want to do. And then he picked the specific mitzvah to point out that they would want to do whatever they wanted to do. And so that's why they said, no, we're not interested at all. The Jewish people, on the other hand, are the ones who say, we want the relationship. It doesn't really matter what's in it. We want to be close to you, God. And that's what the Jewish people said. However, wanting to be in a relationship and having a relationship are two different things. Or I should say there's two parts to it. You can stand under the chuppah, but that's not where you live. You don't live under the chuppah. You don't live at the wedding party. You don't live at the Sheva Brachas. You go home, and then you need to have a relationship. And to really have that loving relationship of, yes, I want to have this relationship, then there's going to be the other part. And that is why we have the Parsha, Ve'ela HaMishpatim. Ve'ela HaMishpatim, 416, 417 of the Chumash. 1 verse 1. Ve'ela hamishpatim. Because the first word is ve'ela, it means, and these are the ordinances. Now that we had the wedding, now we have to talk about how the relationship is going to work. Because again, and even if you aren't married, you know people who are married, or you understand the relationship and get that is the metaphor that is being used at this point, which is that what if you have a relationship where, and we're just going to use husband for the wife, just since we're all women here, so we're just to say the husband all the time says to his wife, I just love you, I love being in a relationship with you, you're the best. Like, oh, thank you, that's so sweet, I'd love to hear that. And then, the time goes on, and the wife has a little bit of a, when the husband comes home, walks in the door and he's on his phone. And he's kind of on his phone instead of greeting his wife or saying anything to the children. And she says to him afterwards, she says, you know what? I'd really appreciate it if you weren't on your phone when you walked in. He's like, I love you so much. And the next day he comes in and he's on his phone. It's like, okay, maybe he forgot. I mentioned it once. Honey, I'm happy to see you and the kids are happy to see you. I really don't want you to be on the phone. When you come in, it feels like you're not really connected to me. Now, how long does this go on in a good way before the wife says, I don't think you do love me? Because if you really loved me, you would be paying attention to what I'm telling you that is important for me in this relationship. And by my telling you and you dafka not doing it, you are really telling me you don't love me, or that your love is kind of a ephemeral something up there that doesn't have any substance, because you're not showing me that you love me. In fact, I would rather you get off the phone and not tell me you love me. I would rather you show me that you love me. What is that musical? There was a musical something, don't just words, don't just say it, show me. I don't remember what musical that was, but some musical. Show me that you love me. How do you show me? By showing love, respect, compassion, empathy, appreciation. and refraining from things that are going to be hurtful, annoying, bothersome, painful. That's how you show me. And that's how the relationship is then built. So it's not all one thing or the other, but if you're going to get down to it, when relationships fizzle, and not just marriages, but other relationships, it's not because there was necessarily a lacking of saying how much I love you, or how much I like you, or how much I care for you. It's like, you're not showing me that. I'm not seeing it. So what God is telling the Jewish people is Sinai is amazing. And at Sinai, at the same place, before we leave here, I'm going to tell you the Ve'ela HaMishpatim. And these are the ordinances that are going to make the relationship work. And these, I'm telling you, are the things that you're going to need to do, but mostly refrain from doing. To me, but primarily to my other children, other people, in the family, in a community, in a society, in a nation, in order to be the lamp, a light unto the nations, and to demonstrate what this relationship really looks like. And so we go through, and the Parsha of Mishpatim has 53 mitzvot in it, 53 mitzvahs of what the Jewish people then are going to agree to do. And they agree to do that. After the wedding, first they're in, but then afterwards, then they will say, we agree to all of this. We want the whole package. So it's interesting. Sometimes people think it's very unromantic that at a Jewish wedding that we have a ketubah. Now, a lot of people don't know what the ketubah even says because it's in Aramaic and it's read super fast so that the guests don't get annoyed. But in there are the obligations of the husband to the wife, of him providing for her according to the standards of the community, of him guaranteeing her sexual satisfaction. Now, I'm sorry, that just seems like, isn't that a little clinical? You know, are we gonna really have, isn't that like what we would talk about in marriage therapy? You know, you're not really, things aren't really working out so well in that area. It's like, no, that's part of the ketubah. He owes that to her. That's part of what he's signing up for. That's the ketubah. If people really knew it. Now, people, unfortunately, people have taken the ketubah and kind of created their own fluffy document, which is very sweet and has an emotional appeal. But that's not what a Jewish marriage is. It is, yes, I love you, and I'm standing under the chuppah, and I think you're the most amazing person. However, this relationship is going to be launched or fall based on how I actually treat you after the wedding and what's going to happen on the daily basis. Now, it doesn't go into everything. It doesn't say I'm going to take out the trash. It doesn't say, you know, whatever, but it covers the broad base that says, and in the description about the sexual satisfaction, it says to guarantee a woman that is a very big deal because women are complicated. As any man will tell you, women are complicated. What does it take to make you happy? It's not just the physical relationship. We're not talking about, you know, whatever. We're not talking about just the physical aspect of the relationship. A woman's sexual satisfaction revolves a lot around where she is emotionally, how she feels about the relationship, how she feels about him and everything, how the day went together. So it's just by saying that one thing, it's really pulling in everything. Because otherwise she's gonna say, you know, I really have a headache. Why does she have a headache? Well, you know, I'm not so happy with you. And so how are we having a relationship? So it's all of these details are what's involved in Parshas Mishpatim. And so it says, this is the meat of the relationship. And it's here that then God says, yeah, you are going to be my holy people. And this is what the holiness is going to be revolving around. With that, if you go through and look at most of the mitzvahs that are in there, they're mostly things to not do, to not steal, to not harm people, to not, you know, oppress them, all of these things of being compassionate and empathetic. So I wanted to take a look at just a few examples, and each of these examples is just the tip of the iceberg and really expands out into all sorts of applications in our everyday life. So let's take a look at one, which is to, hold on one second. Let's take a look at, I wrote my note with a pen that is not very, let's take a look at page 431. Parsha. And we're going to look at verse 20. Verse 20. So it says, "You shall not taunt or oppress a stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt." So what does it mean to taunt or to oppress a stranger? First of all, who is a stranger? Who is a stranger? Now you could say it's somebody who just moved, is an immigrant. That's one kind of a stranger, but that's not the only kind of person who's a stranger. Who else is a stranger? It says anybody who even comes from a place that they are not familiar with. So I live on the east side of Denver and belong to the Dot Minion. When I go to the west side and go to Zera Avraham, I'm a stranger there. It's not my shul, it's not my community. So how are people supposed to treat me? They're supposed to be kind and welcoming and gracious because I'm a stranger. So a stranger could be a new person to the community. It could be somebody who's in a different community, even visiting, and how we treat them. What does it mean to not taunt them? It could be mean, like, again, if you were thinking about it only in the framework of an immigrant, it'd be like, oh, people from that country are, whatever, they're whatever you want to say, some sort of mean stereotypical thing. But you could taunt somebody to say, again, just using an example, and I've never experienced this, this is only an example. If somebody said, oh, you're from the east side, you belong to the Dot Minion? Well, aren't they blah, 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 whatever they would say, aren't they not really so into Judaism, or aren't they, whatever they would say, something that would be about the place I came from, my family, my community, my city, any of those things, my profession. I think I've shared with you before that we one time had a guest for Shabbos. It was fascinating. He was traveling through town, and our rabbi had asked if we could host him for a Shabbos meal. So he came to us for dinner. We had already planned other guests. So there were probably about 8 of us at the table, plus him. And he managed, in the time that he was at our table, to insult every single person who was at the table. Which, first of all, if you're a guest, I'm sorry, you kind of maybe want to keep your mouth shut until you kind of know the lay of the land. But he didn't even realize it. He managed to insult people from New York. They were from New York. People from Texas, said something about Texas, lawyers, whatever it was, he managed to say something. Everyone's looking at Steve and me like, who is this person? I'm like, I don't even know him. And he managed just in the course of conversation, and think about how we do that. Democrats, Republicans, conservatives, liberals, Orthodox people, Haredi people, Reform people, conservative people, unaffiliated people. We have opinions about every single person, and yet some of the people who we love and adore are all those people. Those are called oppressing somebody. That is taunting them for who they are. It's like, we don't do that. So it's not just somebody who has a comparable experience like the Jews being in Egypt. It is anybody you could say who is out of place for whatever reason and for whatever length of time. And to be compassionate and understanding. And I have to say, we went, when our kids lived in New York, which was for a long time, we would go to their shul. And there was this really, really lovely couple there who, it was a big synagogue, KJ, Kehilat Yeshurun, and very, very large shul. And at Kiddush, there's so many people, it's very easy to get lost in the crowd. I wouldn't blame anybody if nobody said anything to us. I really wouldn't. You don't really pay, you talk to your friends and you don't really notice who's there. This one couple came over to introduce themselves. Like, where are you from? He said, Denver. Oh, Denver. I've heard so many lovely things about Denver. I would just love to go there sometime. Now, that made me feel so good and so welcome. Every time we visited, they came over. And then one time they actually did come to Denver. And so then we got to have them at our shul and to be with them and introduce them and be friends. It says, how do you create relationships with others? It says, our relationship with Hashem that we created at Mount Sinai is not just a relationship with God. It's a relationship with the rest of the Jewish people and really all of humanity and the animal kingdom and the earth and everything else. It's like, it's to be in relationship. And so if somebody wants to say, well, I'm so close to God, but how am I treating God's children? It doesn't work unless it's the and God and his children. And we also don't have the opposite. Some people would like to think, it's more important how you treat people. It's like, it's not more important. It's the, and. Two sides of the tablets, the relationship between us and God and the relationship between us and other people. And last I heard, neither of the tablets were deemed that they had expired their usefulness. So both of those tablets, ve'ela. But in this is what's harder, actually. It's harder sometimes to be in relationship with people because people can just be so annoying and strange and bothersome. And so how am I supposed to be in relationship with these people? God is okay. God's not really bothering me. God is God. You know, it's easier to have a relationship with the divine than with his children in this world. I remember, and I think some of us here on the call, on our class here, will remember when we were involved with settling families from the former Soviet Union, or we'll remember the years beforehand where we fought petitions and letters to our congressmen and everything to free the Jews, the Soviet Jews. That was like a whole big focus. And Denver had a huge focus, a lot of people who were involved with that. And that was great. And then those families came to Denver. And guess what? Not all the families were so easy to work with. Some people weren't very grateful. Some people were just too, I don't know, they were just too much. People like, I do better with a cause. I write a check and I'll sign a petition, but I just don't want to have to deal with the people. And it became actually very, very challenging. So it says actual human individuals are challenging. And so God is giving us a list of, I'm going to tell you how to navigate not just a civilized world, but a world where there is true connection between people. And most of it is going to be about refraining from doing things that are annoying to other people, that are hurtful. And when we can do that, we will have a society that is really worthy of being a nation that is called a Mamlechet Kohanim, that we are a priestly nation, that we are a holy people, a Goy Kadosh. What does it mean to be a Goy Kadosh, to be a holy nation? So that's the first one. So to even think that the next time that you are any place, whenever we get to go some places, to go someplace, and anyone we encounter, I have to tell you, we shop at King Soopers usually on Leedsdale and Monaco. If I'm at the King Soopers over in University Hills, it's like I'm in a different city. The store is laid out completely differently. And I'm looking for them like, where is, I don't know, whatever it is. And to have somebody say, oh, it's just right over there. And just to be helpful, all of those things are, instead of saying, can't you read the sign? It's like right in front of your face. That all of the things that we do to help people be comfortable and at home in our presence, wherever we are, that is not taunting a stranger and not oppressing them. And then even more so, it continues on, you shall not cause pain to any widow or orphan. Just so you know, an orphan is considered anybody who's lost even one parent. In Jewish philosophy, that person is an orphan. And it doesn't matter how old you are. So that after, those of us who are older and have more recently lost our parents, you'd think that an orphan is somebody who has to be like a child. But an orphan for sure is anybody before they get married. If you lose your parents before you get married, you are considered an orphan. Even one parent, that's called an orphan status. If you didn't have your parent there to walk you down the aisle, that's called an orphan. And at any age that a person is to lose their parents, that you become an orphan. So if you think about who's an orphan, as we get older, all of us are. I remember the man who lives across the street from us. I think he was about, I don't know how old he was. Maybe he was 60 and his mother was 90. His father had died earlier. But after his mother passed away, he was walking around kind of tongue in cheek, but he was saying, I'm an orphan. Now here he is like a man with a gray beard. He's like, you're not an orphan, like you're a grown man. But we don't have that definition. We have that somebody who is bereft of their parents at any age really then becomes an orphan. So if we're supposed to be extra sensitive to orphans, that means the older we get and the more people we have lost in our lives, we're supposed to be even more sensitive to those people. A widow, that is not just within the first few weeks after they lose their spouse, but for the rest of their life, they are considered a widow unless and until they remarry. If they remarry, then, not that we can start being mean to them, but the extra sensitivity does not apply. But until then, a person is a widow or a widower is for the rest of their lives. And says that this is very challenging because one of the things that we know happens in communities is people rally around people in the initial days and weeks and months after a loss, any loss. And then after that, people kind of go on with their lives and forget about people and don't check in and don't see how they're doing. Says that is oppressive. That is oppressive to a widow to not see how they're doing. There are some people who make it their business, which is so amazing, to call widows or to call widows or widowers on the anniversary of the death of their spouse, to just let them know, I'm thinking about you and your husband, or you and your wife, or also, God forbid, you and your child, whoever it might be, that says like, you are in my heart and you are in my mind. So when we say don't oppress somebody, we don't mean just like the things that would get you written up on the paper or online on a chat of how terrible you are as a person. We're talking about the things that people experience as oppressive, that people experience as hurtful, even if it's not intentional. That it's just that's just what their experience is, and we're supposed to be sensitive to it. So I just want to say, Andy, you came on late. I'm not singling you out, but I just want to say we said Mazel Tov to Marcia on the birth of her nephew. So I want to say Mazel Tov to you on the birth of your new grandson, and that he was born on the yortzeit of your mother. And what a huge bracha that is for you and your family. And it should add to that day of how you experience the day of her yortzeit. And Mazel Tov to
Ilinko as well.
So, okay, so that's an example. So even if you just take that one sentence, is going to cover so many people that we know in so many different circumstances. Strangers, orphans, and widows. You could say, I don't know really so many orphans. I don't think I know so many widows. I don't know so many strangers. Like, yes, you do. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. And all of us, that's who's in the world. That is who is in the world. The next one to talk about is about when we loan something to somebody, when we lend money specifically. And that's in verse 24. When you, on the same page 431, when you lend money to my people, to the poor person who is with you, do not act toward him as a creditor, and do not lay interest upon him. When it says do not act toward him as a creditor, it talks about that it's not just that we're not supposed to oppress them further to make them feel bad or to make them feel less than us because they are the borrower and we are the creditor. That there should not be any haughtiness, there should not be any arrogance, there should not be any judgment, that there needs to be complete friendship. It's supposed to be level. This person just needs to borrow money. The fact that they are destitute, the fact that one could say, well, if they ever had a head for business, or if they would have worked harder, or if they would have consulted, me or something, if they would have done any of those things, they wouldn't find themselves in this position. We don't judge that, because that can all come across in acting like a creditor. So that in a way that sentence doesn't even make any sense. Do not act toward him as a creditor. That's exactly what you are, is a creditor. So what does that mean? Don't act like a creditor. So what you are in material fact, that you are the lender and the other person is the borrower, that's all it needs to be. Everything else needs to be level and respectful and friendly. It goes to the point where it says that the creditor is not supposed to walk past the borrower's home in a way that kind of makes the borrower remember, like, oh, I owe that person money. They're supposed to go out of their way, in fact, cross the street, to not make that person feel bad about the fact that they are borrowing money. says it's hard enough to be in the financial position. We don't need to heap on embarrassment and discomfort on top of that. And it's hard to do that. It's hard because when we have, first of all, when we have money and we have money to loan, there is a tendency to feel a little bit arrogant about the fact that I have it and you don't, and you are beholden to me. That's kind of like considered like a natural thing. And even if a person is very, very humble, and that's not how they feel, they are supposed to be taking extreme measures to not convey in any way they are looking at this person any differently because they have borrowed money from them. It's just a beautiful sensitivity that we can apply it to other things as well. That anytime somebody might be beholden to us, let's say they had to ask us a favor. It doesn't have to be just loaning money. It could be they need our help. Now, some people love to help, and that's wonderful. But some people, when they help you, you can almost feel that they're keeping track. They are somehow keeping track, and they like having people be beholden to them. It gives them a certain sense of power. And so a person has to make extra effort not to do that. Human beings do not like to be beholden. It's like even parents do that to children. After all I've done for you, you know, how much money do you think I spent on you and your sister for blah, blah, blah? It's like, that's acting as a creditor. That's not appropriate. There needs to be a different parenting approach than that. Because that is diminishing of a person's sense of self. So we are concerned about the person. Again, the world works so that we all need each other at some point for something. And we're supposed to have a better understanding that in this situation, I have what to give to somebody who needs. And in another situation, they have what I need and to give to me. And if there's going to be a constant jockeying around this borrowing and lending and doing favors and everything for everybody, it creates hostility, and it creates a disconnect in a family, in a community, and in a society to function in that way. So it's like, don't act like a creditor. So of course they do owe you. Our children owe us, we owe our parents, whatever it might be. That's the way God wants the world to work, is for us to be interdependent, but to not use it as a bludgeon, either emotionally or financially or in any other way on the people who it happens to be impacting. It's a very key idea, again, of sensitivity. The next one is, has to do with I was looking for it and I actually couldn't find it because I didn't have my Chumash in the car. There is you cannot, I think it's in here, if anybody sees it. I don't know if it's in here or not. I think it is about animals that you cannot, I don't know if it's in here or not. But also, okay, I'm just going to describe this, and I don't have the source for it. You're not allowed to yoke an ox and a donkey together to work. So it says, so before the ethical treatment of animals, before any animals, whatever sensitivity developed in the world, the Torah already told us this subtle thing. So it goes without saying that we are not allowed to inflict unnecessary harm on an animal. Now you could say, well, we slaughter them and eat them, but that's why the laws of kashrut are designed to have no pain, so the animal does not suffer. We are allowed to use animals and we're allowed to benefit from animals. We're just not allowed to harm them or cause them pain that is unnecessary. And it's at such a subtle level. So why can't you put a donkey and an ox together? Anybody have any ideas? Why can't you put a donkey and an ox together? Any thoughts? Patricia?
One is probably stronger or faster than the other.
Okay, great. Okay, and so that would probably be the ox, right? So the ox is stronger. The ox is considered the king of domesticated animals. Kind of the comparable would be the lion of the wild animals, and the ox is strong, powerful, And that if the ox is pulling its weight literally, and the donkey is like, what's it doing? So one of two things are going to happen. And this feels like a Disney movie, this anthropomorphization of animals. Either the ox is going to be like, well, this isn't fair. He hitched up two animals and I'm pulling all the work because that donkey is like worthless. Or the donkey is going to say, I can't believe I'm supposed to be doing this. This is like way above my pay grade. I can't possibly keep up with an ox. I feel like a schlemiel. So it says, no matter how you go, the animals are going to be upset about this. And then it's going to get personal. I don't even like oxes. I hate donkeys. So it says, even in the animal kingdom, we are supposed to be concerned about how things are working together. And then there's the other one, which I think is kind of funny, but also true. It says that the ox is a kosher animal and therefore it chews its cud. So for those of you who are familiar with what chewing cud means, I don't know exactly, but the animal chews and swallows, and then it comes back up and is further chewed and swallowed. So it's like regurgitated, et cetera, and then goes back. A donkey does not do that. So it says the donkey's going to see that the ox is chewing a lot and thinking like, how come he got more food than me? I already finished my meal. It's done. And now he's still chewing. He must have gotten a bigger portion. This is just like the children. They got more pizza than me. The hot dog was bigger than mine. I only got one scoop of ice cream. How come they're still eating? I mean, I remember my sisters and I, when we got whatever our nickel was for our allowance, and we would go to the store and we could buy something. And my sister, she always bought black licorice, which I thought was like the worst thing ever. And I bought a package of pudding, which I thought was really smart because it makes a lot. And then you have like more to eat. And then mine lasted longer than hers because by the time she got home from the store, her black licorice was done. And I still had like my whole thing of pudding. So it's like, we do care about this as children. It says, and the animals do also. It's like, it's not fair. He got more food than me. Now you could say, well, an ox is bigger than a donkey anyway, and probably would be eating more food anyway. So, but the fact that kind of like Ma'arit Ayin of how it looks to the donkey like the ox got more. It says, don't hitch them together. It's not good for them. It's not good for their relationship. Now, I don't know if anybody's ever worked on a farm and had any ox-donkey brawls. I'm not sure that ever really happened, that there was any of these things came to light about how they were feeling about each other or how this was working. But the Torah goes out of its way to say, can't do this because it's insensitive. It is insensitive. So if we are so concerned about insensitivity in the animal world, how might we see this in the human world? It could be that people who are put together to work on a project, that somebody's exceptionally strong and somebody's exceptionally weak. Now, I remember, I don't know, I'm looking here and I'm seeing mostly high achievers here in the school world. And you were probably put in the group that where you're supposed to be in charge and you were supposed to be a good influence on the people who were weaker. But then what happened is you ended up doing all the work for the project and got really annoyed. That's probably what really happened. I'm not sure how many people were inspired by, quote, the stronger people. So that doesn't really work so well. It's a little bit more like the ox with the mule. It's like, it doesn't really work. You cause actually animosity between people when there's not an even match. It's not fair. There has to be a different way of working at it. If you want to set up a mentoring relationship, that's a different thing. But if you tell people they're partners and they're not really partners, it doesn't really work. So it says, even in our human relationships, it can be on a committee, it could be in a classroom, it can be really in any realm. Is there an imbalance somewhere there that's going to actually cause more difficulty than success? We need to be very sensitive to that. If we're concerned about the ox and the mule, we're concerned about everybody else in our environment. So something else to think about as far as that sensitivity. Okay, the next one is, and then I want to talk about something that is different. I think one more thing to talk about here, which is page 435, verse 6. This says, do not pervert the judgment of your destitute person in his grievance. Now, what does that mean? This means that sometimes it's possible to go too far, that if somebody is destitute, we tend to assign virtue to them. We tend to assign a benefit of the doubt to them. We tend to think, well, they're the oppressed. So we're going to kind of like weight it in favor of them. You know, kind of like people shoplifting from Target. Well, they're a poor person and Target's a big corporation. So, you know, we should really kind of go light on them because Target can afford it. They pay insurance for shoplifting or whatever. People have that attitude. You know, if it's a corporation, if it's a government, whatever, and somebody's destitute, somebody's kind of down, or they're an individual, then we're going to tilt towards that. It's like, no, you cannot do that. That's called a perversion of judgment. It has to be fair. So it's very nice to be compassionate, but when we are judging things, especially in a court, you cannot go to that extreme. That is as much a distortion as to hold something against them. So we have to be able to judge people fairly, even if they are destitute. Now, if the judge in the court wants to say this person is destitute, they can't afford to pay the fee or the fine or whatever it's going to be, we're going to work out a payment plan or do something else, that's fine in the on how it's handled for restitution. But in the judgment itself, the person's guilty. You cannot say they're not guilty because they're destitute and the person they harmed has more money or is whatever, and so therefore probably the poorer person is the person who's in the right. And people do this in our society all the time. Assume if you are in a protected class, you are right. If you are disadvantaged, you're right. It's like, no, it has to be fair. It has to be fair. If you want to take other remedial actions afterwards, that's a totally different story. And in fact, that is done in rabbinic decision-making all the time. There's a Beis Din, there was a wealthy man, he had contractors who were working for him who were like day laborers, and they I don't know, they broke the equipment, they were lazy, I don't know what they did, but he took them to court. And the judge found, and he said, you're right, wealthy man, but I want you to pay them anyway. So it was like, the justice is you're right, and they are wrong. However, because of their situation, I want you to be involved in helping these guys out. So he was like, okay, and that's what he did. So there is a difference between where we bring our emotions into the courtroom. They do not belong there. It has to be fair. But afterwards, and how something is handled, there can be remedial help for people who are destitute, but it cannot impact the judgment. Very important and timely, I think, for our day and age. All right. I would actually like to conclude with something very, very different. There was an article, and I'm sorry, I read it on my husband's phone, and I did not see the name of the person. You may have seen it. If you get the New York Times, it was an op-ed, or actually, I'm not sure. I don't know what the category it was, written in the New York Times, and it was focused on the word and. And I said to Steve, this is so perfect. Did anybody see this? It was about the ands of life. So I said, I'm going to use this because the first word of the Parsha is and. What she was saying is that we've probably had conversations over the past 2 years with ourselves, other people, family, friends, saying, you know what, I'm so grateful. Yes, there's COVID, but at least I didn't get it. Or if I did get it, at least I didn't have it really bad, or at least I wasn't hospitalized, or at least, whatever, that we are trying to qualify, which on one hand is very meritorious, to be aware of our blessings that we have, saying, I'm so grateful. At least I didn't have this, it could be worse, all of those other statements that we make. What she was proposing that I thought was really helpful and beautiful is to embrace the and, that one can say, COVID is 2.5 years, 2 years, this is so distressing. And I'm also glad that I have a Zoom class and I'm able to be with people who, live other places. It's really wonderful. And it's really upsetting because I really miss seeing people in person. And that in our attempt to kind of come to a final analysis, we're missing being present to the whole experience. And that if we can embrace the and, we can get that. It's like, My kids are driving me crazy being at home on Zoom. And it's really nice to see them in the middle of the day and have lunch with them because I didn't see them until 5:30 or 6 when I got home from work. And I don't know, I think I'm going to tear my hair out because I'm not a third grade teacher. I don't know what to do with these kids and I can't even keep them in their chairs. And so instead of trying to always peg ourselves of where we're at in the final analysis, it doesn't need to be a final analysis. We're not netting it out. We can say, and. She gave us an example also. She said, I'm so grateful that my parents are still alive and we disagree on every single issue that there is in the world. And it's such a blessing that we can have holidays together and, whatever, their friends drive me crazy, that we can have the whole thing and it's more real to have the and. So we can talk about the blessings, we can talk about the challenges, we can have the whole thing. So that made me think also, even though I said something different, of how we started out when we said, Parsha Yitro, standing at Sinai, was standing under the chuppah. And that's the love. Yes, we're in. And here are all the details of what that relationship needs to look like in order for it to flourish. And I'm doing it really because I love you so much. And I know that if I don't get off the phone as I walk in the door, that this is going to ruin our relationship. And here are some flowers, and I'm taking out the garbage. So that all of these things together is like, that's the whole life. So it also reminded me of Kohelet. There is a time for every season, a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to live and a time to die. So normally we tend to think of those, we're either in this column or we are in this column. But that's not what the verse says. It says, and a time to live and a time to die, which means you can have the living and the dying happening at the same time. Somebody comes into the world, somebody exited the world. I can have tears of joy and tears of grief at the same time. Instead of trying to figure out, well, how do I really feel? Is there like, this isn't a box where you check off at the doctor's office, are you experiencing this? Is your face on your pain? I always like it. They have like different faces, like of how much your pain is. It's like, well, my pain is here, but my gratitude is up here. And my annoyance is up here also. It's like, what are we trying to do that we're so busy trying to rate and evaluate that we don't actually have the experience? And in trying to find out where we are on the chart, we are actually missing what real life is all about. And it's really much more about and. So I was very glad when we came down from the mountains today, and it was very, very slick driving. I was really glad that we weren't going, and I didn't have to turn around and go out to BMH and drive and wonder whether we should cancel class or whether everybody else wanted to drive. Like, I'm so glad I could just come home, go downstairs, get on Zoom, and I miss seeing all of you so much in person. And it's so great to be able to have this technology. And. So I know people always recommend this in a conversation or in an argument to, instead of saying but, to say and say that there are more pieces, but I think it's a way of thinking that will probably impact and have a ripple effect into other aspects of our life when we embrace the and. Then it will be more natural. If somebody else has a point of view, you can say, and I feel this, instead of I don't have to negate you in order to have me, just like I don't have to negate one of my experiences or my perceptions in order to have the other one. It doesn't have to be or. It can be and. Now I have to tell you that on the SAT test, those and things made me crazy, where the answer is A and B. I'm like, oh my God, I don't know, like which one is more right. So our life is not an SAT test where we have to pick one answer. And the answer is A and B and C and D and E and all of it. And that is a full life. And the truth is, it will actually give us more energy to deal with the challenges and more openness to the pleasure, because our emotions are triggered by our thoughts. So if I think that I have to say, well, at least it's not, then I have to calibrate my emotional response. If I can be disappointed and happy together, That's amazing. That's amazing. So we find this at life cycle events oftentimes where we have a mixture of emotions, which is why we often have tears. So you have a simcha and you're so happy for the simcha and you miss the people who aren't there. And you're so glad, if they were there, then this child who was named for them couldn't be there because that's how they got there, is because this other person's not here. So and we can have all of it. And that's what brings us to tears. I remember, for our kids' weddings, so grateful that they found their bashers. And that means that they're not coming back to my house ever again in the same way. And even one time when we ended up having Audrey and Benjamin at our house, I even forget what the situation was. I think it was not for anything good. I don't remember what it was, but they were both here with us without their spouses. And at first I thought, oh, this is gonna be really nice. I get to be with my kids without their, just us, the four of us originally. Nope. It was wonderful. It was. And their spouses were there because they are married. And so their spouses were there in their hearts and conversation, everything else. So all these things are like this and this and this and this. So ve'ela hamishpatim, the world, our lives are very multifaceted, multi-layered, and that is a place to really enter into a life that is meaningful, that is uplifting, and even in the challenges and the things that are difficult is because we have the and moments. People have said, I don't know if people who have sat Shiva have found this to be, that sometimes people are very surprised that there are happy, funny moments in Shiva. That people in reminiscing about somebody, that somebody will say something funny about somebody or a memory or whatever it is, and people almost feel guilt. It's like, we're supposed to be sitting Shiva. There can't be like any lightheartedness, like not in all situations. Some situations it really isn't. But in many situations, especially when it's somebody who has lived a full life and it's not tragic circumstances, there are some very funny moments. I think, I shared with you that when my father passed away, it was very sudden. He passed away at age 68, had a massive heart attack, and it was he passed away like right at the end of Simchas Torah. And he was supposed to go to my sister's house for one of the nights of Sukkot. And he had made pickles. He has a really good recipe for pickles. And he had taken them over to my sister's house so that he wouldn't be carrying them on Yontif. And then he died. And so then we're sitting Shiva and we were having Shabbos dinner and my sister had his pickles in the refrigerator. So then we're sitting there kind of laughing and crying like, should we eat the pickles? It's like, Dad would want us to eat the pickles, but these are also the last pickles that we would have that he made. So if we eat them, then we won't have them. It's like, well, it's not like we can preserve them forever. So like, I think we should eat them. But I mean, everybody was just like laughing and crying together. And then we made like a l'chaim on the pickle, which were really good. And that was like a very memorable part of our Shiva. So life is so interesting and it has a lot of ands in it. And I hope that hopefully we have more pleasure than pain, but all of our experiences are so mixed. And hopefully we can embrace that and enjoy the ride because that certainly is what it is. All right, ladies, thank you so much for joining me. I'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you, Ellyn.
You are so welcome. If anybody has any questions or comments, you're welcome to stay on and ask. I'm happy to respond.
Thank you, Ellyn.
My pleasure.
Boobs.
Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos, everybody. I can't believe